Sound and vision play intertwining roles in the practices of our roundtable speakers today. I'm Catherine Hemmelreich, the director of the Centre for Contemporary Art Derry Londonderry, and I'm joined by artists and musicians Susan Hughes, Peter Glasgow, and Ryan Vail. Susan Hughes works across the north of Ireland from Donegal to her home in Belfast. She graduated with an MFA from the University of Ulster in 2021 and has completed many artist residencies in Ireland and Scandinavia, using her fiddle playing as a bartering tool to gain access to local stories. Her exhibition, Stones from a Gentle Place, is at CCA until the 28th of March 2024. You can read more about Susan's exhibition at ccadld.org, where you can also visit the digital residency by our next guest, Peter Glasgow. Peter is a visual artist who works and lives in County Antrim. He graduated with a Masters in Fine Art Printmaking at the Royal College of Art in 2015, and his practice spans audiovisual installation, printed matter, and live talks. Ryan Vail is a musician, composer, and producer based in our city, as well as a director of Visual Spectrum Studios creating light and AV installations. He won Best Album at the Northern Ireland Music Prize in 2019 for Borders with Elma Orkestra, and his live music and DJ sets are very much visual events. This roundtable is made possible thanks to the support of Arts Council of Northern Ireland, Derry City and Strabane District Council, and the Art Fund. So let's begin. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our Roundtable podcast today. All of you have a really interesting practice, I think, the way that you all use music and visuals in different ways. Some sort of more predominantly a visual artist, but also music being incredibly important. And I wanted to ask all of you, did one arrive before the other? Did music arrive before art, or did art arrive before music, or did it all arrive at the same time, sort of, back at the start? Perhaps, Peter, could I ask you first?
Yeah, of course. I think for me, although I maybe kind of played some music when I was younger, like I think of my work as kind of a sort of broad visual arts practice, and music maybe only kind of entered that when there was some kind of material, when there was some music in the world that I wanted to like pull at. And then when there was that, I kind of could then reach for the kind of musical tool to be able to bring that in.
And Susan, what about you?
Well, I went to violin lessons when I was a child, so I always had both things going on at the same time. Like I did A-level music and A-level art, and it's like they've existed in parallel. It's only the last couple of years, maybe since I did a master's, that I'm able to articulate how, like I couldn't pin it down how music wove into my visual art. It was like they existed in parallel, but they do, of course, inform each other, because how you exist in life is made up of lots of different things, and everything informs each other. So yeah, I'm only able to articulate that the music brings me to certain places, and I hear stories, and that all informs my art, if that makes sense. But yeah, they just have always existed together.
And what about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I think as I get older, I start to understand how things have arrived in my life a wee bit better. And I think for music and the arts, it's very apparent now. It's probably the influence of my family. My mother was an artist. My dad was a jazz musician. And I think when I was growing up, the struggle of being a musician was very apparent in our house, to the point where we nearly like were homeless a few times. So like I think I grew up with quite a heavy musical influence, because obviously my dad was always playing guitar, I was learning guitar, but never wanted to really accept that I was a musician, because the fear of, being this hard lifestyle that we experienced our entire childhoods. So I kind of almost was pushing music to the background, and looking for other ways to express myself, and ended up, going into like art, the art realm, photography, studying a lot of that. But it just so happened after I became, studied in the arts, musical was my way of expressing what I was trying to do. So it kind of came full circle, which is also probably a sign of maturity within my creativity as well, that I could return to it without any, I suppose, hard feelings from the past. But as things progress, the two are kind of welded together now, the visuals and the music. And I think it's like the same for all artists. It's time really focuses what your art does, doesn't it? It doesn't happen automatically.
Susan, In the current exhibition, we have the installation with various artworks, which can stand alone without any sound, but there's an audio piece that's submerged, perhaps sort of watery sounds and partial song coming through. Could you tell us a bit about how that piece was developed and why you wanted audio to permeate the space?
I swam in phosphorescence in the sea a couple of years ago. Well, I've had the experience every year since. It's phosphorescence is like plankton that takes energy from the sun, and then it can be ignited at night in the sea, sort of warm times of the year, by movement. So like a human hand would create little sparkles. So I was trying to figure out how to represent that through art, and the audio seemed to be a good way, because a lot of the stuff I've been making is about things in the dark. So audio is really important then, that sort of your audio senses are heightened and things can be very abstracted. So yeah, I was kind of responding to that. And the phosphorescence is in the sea, and you swim in the sea to ignite it, but I didn't want to just use water sounds. So I kind of built it out of field recordings, especially my father's bat detector recordings. They just created little sounds that kind of come across in stereo, but then I made them like much deeper and much higher, and they're just completely synthesized, but yet it does sound kind of like being in deep in water. And yeah, it's funny how the immersion of that works really well in a dark space and informs how you look at visual pieces.
Definitely. And I think light naturally segues to Ryan. So, can you tell us about some of the light that you use in your installations? Like, how do they come about, and
Yeah,
what is it that interests you?
just as Susan explained, like or she's on about how do you describe those little algae things that react, Susan? What are they called again?
Bioluminescent phosphorescence.
Yeah, so we were doing literally a show in Hall recently in Derry, where it was an immersive experience, and one of our ideas was to create like a digital representation of that, where people would come up and we would use Touch Designer, and as they moved around the screen, it would react to them and stuff. I suppose for me and kind of light installations, it's really about embracing new technologies and challenging production methods. I kind of found in my early stage of being a musician and artist, a lot of the ideas were hindered by finances. Constantly, financial restrictions would never allow me to do what I actually wanted to do, whether it be computer power, the knowledge base for various programming aspects of it. And up until COVID, I was always touring shows with these kind of laser shows, and I was always approached from like an artistic style approach rather than like a live music approach. So I would have had these big laser shapes that would hover above people's heads. I'd be very structural and quite thought about. And then COVID hit, and like most people, the financial pressures made us feel a wee bit guilty about maybe pursuing a career in art and music because we couldn't pay our bills. I was lucky that I had just come off this tour where we had this album that done quite well called Borders, which was a huge visual show as well, which challenged the idea of borders around the world, and it was a whole visual journey, the show. But what happened during COVID was I'd actually received a large amount of royalties from the album doing so well. So it came into COVID. I had lost about 35 grand's worth of shows between Mexico and Dubai and all these places. I was sitting in Derry, just got this huge chunk of money, and I could have just sat up and like ate takeaway all through COVID and just had this lavish lifestyle. But the thing is, when you're an artist and you're doing well, it's not you, it's the team around you. And it was very apparent at that point that I would have been fine, but everybody was responsible for my career didn't have any financial support at all. So a couple of friends of mine got together and decided we would start a company. And the company was called Visual Spectrum. And what we did was we employed all our artist friends to basically start a company that would be half production, half kind of artistic practices. And at the time, we were one of the first companies to actually do a HD stream during COVID. It hadn't actually been figured out. That actually happened in Derry before it happened anywhere else. And basically started our entire company on this whirlwind of, oh my God, how the hell are you doing this? So we started tying in with various online ticket agencies and stuff, and quickly realized there was a market for it, but it wasn't really what we wanted to do. So we all kind of sat around and says, Kyle, what have you always wanted to do? Oshin, what have you always wanted to do? And we started throwing all these ideas in there. Like every artistic project we've went to has been hindered by budget. Stuff's either too expensive or we just can't afford it. So we decided to almost split how we operated, one half commercial, and that money would fund our artistic journeys. And also because this company now had around 9 really skilled people in it, we had access to all these like skill sets that neither of us had before. So now we find ourselves financially secure where no one's funding us at all. We're turning over maybe just over $1 million a year now, and everyone's paying their mortgages, having babies, owning cars. And before COVID, we were just about paying our bills and, talking to the banks every mortgage payment. But what it's allowed us to do is pursue our artistic careers, but also have security. So we don't operate like normal businesses. And I suppose where I'm getting to is now when we go to do our artistic projects, we don't have to apply to the Arts Council anymore. Yes, we're being funded. It's maybe funded from different areas, and a lot of the projects we can do them with free entries and stuff. So we can do a really high level production with what we want to do and get a greater spread from it now. So yeah, unfortunately, I suppose what I'm getting to is I always had this vision, but I could never reach it because of the financial pressures of trying to do it. And now we've created like a self-sustainable way of reaching those goals. So yeah, it's probably a different path to many.
Well, I think it's really interesting to see how solving problems whilst having those skill sets, which are
Yeah.
particularly niche, then you can use that to support and play with those other aspects. Peter, coming on to you. So with our digital residency that you made, there are lots of audio clips and really interesting, very particular layout where you're representing how to navigate into the audio works. How do you approach that? How do you bring people visually to the audio?
I think for me, I loved having the idea of having audio as like another sort of voice, and the idea of you sort of sitting with your, like I'm speaking now, but with your kind of instrument on you or however you use it in front of you, and sort of being able to use both. So the residency, it has kind of a written narrative to it. It's a kind of spoken thing, and the audio is kind of just used as another voice of mine, in a sense that you kind of have it there to kind of play off stuff that's spoken or stuff that you kind of see maybe visually. And a bit like what Susan was saying about the kind of heightening, because there's no, when you're hearing an audio clip in that residency, they are just audio clips. I kind of enjoy that, kind of heightening that you get when you're then just listening to a kind of audio clip, and you're kind of then attaching a visual to that or a context to that from the other things that you've gathered along the way, and that's quite exciting, I think.
So have you long played the slide guitar, steel guitar?
Yeah, it's a steel guitar. Yeah.
And is that something that you've revisited throughout your career? And can you tell us a bit more about what you do with it?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I got hooked on 50s, 60s, 70s country music, like honky tonk style country music or hard country, or there's sort of different different terms for it. But I kind of got hooked on this stuff, and the kind of emotional content that I was interested in, I felt like the steel guitar was where that kind of magic maybe happened in that music. And I thought, can I learn to play? Like, I know sort of enough music and I play a couple other instruments. Like, could I pick up a steel guitar? Could I kind of learn it? In a lot of this music at that time, what you're listening to is a pedal steel guitar. So it's a more technologically advanced version of a steel guitar that has foot pedals and knee levers that are kind of changing the pitch of the strings. But this was prohibitively expensive for me. Like, I couldn't afford a pedal steel. I didn't even know how to get anywhere close to getting one. So what I bought was a lap steel guitar, which is a kind of much simpler version of the instrument, which is where the steel guitar kind of evolved from. And I just started there and learned that and started to add things to it and sort of make little levers to let me kind of get towards this sort of more technologically advanced kind of version. And it kind of just developed from there as an explorative process. So that for me was like a methodology for kind of exploring something, this music. Yeah.
kind of want to know about how the knee levers work.
Literally your knee, I'm sitting on a seat, so if you move your knee left, if you imagine like a lever at the side of your knee, and you're just, as you move your knee left, you're moving that lever, and as you move your knee right, you can move the other one. So they're just positioned for your knees because your hands are doing so much. You kind of need these other limbs. So you've kind of got knee levers or foot levers, or I've got like one that you operate with your wrist or your, other parts of your body operate the instrument. Yeah.
Yeah. And do they change the pitch or?
Yeah, so levers on a kind of mechanical steel guitar, yeah, change the pitch of notes, individual strings. So they'll either change a note up a semitone or up a full tone, and yeah, that's kind of built into how you sort of think about the instrument.
Sounds like a very physical thing to play. All of you is involved.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think that's what attracted me to this, was the connection between the sound and the kind of action. I kind of love the idea that like this kind of movement or this kind of bodily action creates, in some sense, or links to this kind of sound and the affect that you feel from that, and kind of figuring that out. And also, I mean, I enjoy that my instrument that I've just sort of put together, it's uniquely sort of built to me, so it kind of fits where my arm is or where my knee is, and so they're idiosyncratic actions as well.
Susan, thinking about how you have instruments kind of tailored to your body, you are a fiddle player, and I remember from my high school violin, just the way that I had molded my shoulder rest and all of those things. So is that also for you a very physical experience playing the fiddle?
Yeah, I guess so. I think the fact that it's an acoustic instrument, that's a big part of it. The vibrations are going through your body and you're playing with other people and you're acoustically, like your spatial awareness and the acoustics of a room, everything is really just analog. It's just vibrations, sound waves, So I'm really interested in that as well. I guess all of us are, that kind of analog and electronic sort of merging and like sort of using really like the base and most basic thing of, your voice and vibrations, just going back to those really basic things is so amazing. And it goes all the way from acoustic instruments to electronic things and thinking about sound waves and light waves and things like that. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's the way I would think about it physically, as opposed to, I'm just so used to, when it's like, if you're playing sport or something, it's just like you're so used to it. It's just part of your body. It's like an extension of your body. You don't really think about it anymore.
Yeah, so that always reminds me of like there was a time when we were touring our Borders album, and it was just being a guy Owen. It was like a collaborative project. So he was playing piano, I was doing the live kind of synth bass and drum machines, and we'd been touring it quite extensively as just a two-piece, and then it got to the point where we got to bring in like 16 players of strings, symphony orchestra. And I always remember the time of us, being really tired, traveling, and getting to the first stage where we were doing that, and the violin players starting up, and then the cello joining on. You're just like, oh my god, this is just like. But it was like that perfect like crossover, as you say, of like analog meets digital, and then that resonant feeling of being on the stage where the two like just met was like just so impactful. And I suppose that's the case for probably, I would say, many of your installations and that crossover in general, isn't it? There's something quite warming about it.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking about the steel guitar, the physicality of that instrument. When I was in France last year, I saw this instrument called an Ondes Martineau. It's like one of the first synthesizers,
Yeah.
I guess. And like just it looked like a steel guitar. I guess it had a keyboard, but then it had this steel string along it. And the way that the instrument was amplified and the different types of vibrations that it was manifested through, all of it. Yeah, it seems so physical, and yet it is it's electronic instruments. It's brilliant when things combine like that.
Yeah.
And several of you have those collaborations. Susan, you performed at our launch. It wasn't just you, you had your guest. And when you're singing together and you're playing together, that sort of rapport and that building the reels is pretty magic. What do you enjoy about the collaborative approach?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things that are so beautiful about it, especially when you're singing. Just the harmonies. If you ever get to sing harmonies with someone, it's not really like anything else. It's so beautiful. I mean, I've played violin in ensembles where you're harmonizing with those voices, but the human voice is something else, and sort of the trust that you have to have with someone, and that you're so vulnerable, and yeah, you have to kind of communicate with each other. So yeah, it is really magic. But just the playing acoustic instruments together and the way the instruments speak to each other audibly in the space, it's really fascinating to kind of experience it differently in different spaces and different moods and head spaces too.
Yeah, I was going to say, Ryan, when you were particularly with Elma Orkestra, because I saw one of the performances of Borders, how did you establish that collaboration?
Yeah, a collaboration was always like kind of a weird thing for me. I kind of used it as maybe slightly different to how other people use collaborations. I was always like a keen vinyl collector from quite a young age. And it's kind of funny because obviously like vinyl records now are quite trendy and got really expensive somehow. But I used to buy them because it was just what I could afford. And when CDs came on, records were actually cheaper. So I just found myself buying records my whole life. But yeah, I always wanted to challenge the genres that I listened to. And I was never happy just listening to one genre. My record collection's everything from really deep folk to bluegrass to jazz to techno. And I suppose that's one of the nicest things about music is how deep you can go and the random directions. And it's the same as art. And that's one of the nice kind of crossovers. But for me, I always used these kind of collaborations when I felt I was becoming stale in the studio and my ideas weren't really developing beyond what I could normally do. So I always remember one of the first albums I put out was with a folk singer called Kieran Lavery. And at the time, he was kind of blowing up. He was like getting 5 million plays a month on like Spotify, but people weren't really coming to his shows. And at the time, I was touring an EP or an album, and I was selling out all my shows. So he was like based down in like Lurgan or somewhere. I was in Derry, and he kind of messaged me and he was like, do you want to do this thing together? And at the time I was onto like these experimental soundscapes and just being really avant-garde with synthesizers. And when a folk singer like that approached me, it really caught me off guard because I just didn't feel like I would be someone he would listen to because I certainly didn't listen to him. But but it also made me feel, well, if he's asking me, he's clearly got something on there that's really intrigued about this sound and he wants to investigate it. So that kind of got me intrigued. And I remember we done this album called Sea Legs and we decided to write it about the Donegal coast. And there was a lot of found sound in it, and a lot of it was about challenging each other's writing styles. He was playing acoustic, singing, I was singing with him, and doing all these synth layouts and stuff. But that led me on to my debut album, and it really helped me write my debut album because I was writing in new ways and I felt inspired after doing that collaborative process. And throughout my career, every kind of collaboration I've done, I've got a lot from it. Like there's someone else, there was a Jealous of the Birds, this grungy singer from Belfast direction as well. I always remember doing a track with her, and I hadn't really listened to anything with like distortion, grunge kind of guitars in it in a long time. And it was like certain genres don't move along as well, and that's fine. They just figure out their sound and their kind of chord formats, and that's what works, and that's what they are. And they don't want to be innovative, and they don't need to move anywhere because they're just great the way they are. and for me, that's the way grunge was. I used to listen to Nirvana and all these kind of like classic bands, and she came through, and I was like, oh, this just kind of sounds like what I used to listen to when I was 17. And then the more I listened to her lyrics, it's like, oh, she's got something going on here that's like really fresh within this genre that I'd never expected. And again, that led to more great things. So I think for every artist, it's a really healthy thing to do to develop your career is to let other people in. And you're kind of letting them into your personal space, really, when art's involved, which is the hard thing. But like, I have nothing but good things to say about collaboration.
Peter, I see you nodding along.
Yeah, I was thinking about just when you were saying that, Ryan. Yes, this approach from other genres. Like I have a friend who is a drummer for a punk rock band, and yeah, I've been kind of sending him hard country stuff, and we're sort of trying to sort of work on something kind of performative together. But it's just that basic idea of I love that idea of him approaching this genre that he doesn't have an experience of, doesn't play, and kind of approaching it openly and sort of asking asking him what draws him in, or what does it, I'm talking about what it feels like to play this rhythm that characterizes this music. And it's just a really nice approach to exploring something that you're maybe familiar with kind of through somebody else.
There's something really beautiful about the naivety of the approach too, isn't it? Like I really like. I'm a massive fan of string players and work with quartets nonstop. I remember we were doing a project, and it's kind of like every time they get a phone call from me, they almost like worry. They're like, what's he going to throw at us this time? and what we were doing was, it was a VR art project where we invited 4 artists to paint in VR. So we were going to project 50-foot VR paintings behind this quartet that would play this score that they weren't going to be aware of, the artists. And what we done was we scored all of Aphex Twin's tunes. So we took this really random electronic artist. Well, he's quite an important one, but he had loads of great tracks and all these wee things like Avril and stuff, all these like beautiful piano pieces. And I just remember when we gave them the sheets for them to look at, they were like looking at it being like, oh, this is really nice. What is this? And then I was playing them the original tracks, to which they were like horrified. But, musically, it was actually beautiful. So yeah, again, it's just that thing of like, it's really important as an artist to stay really open-minded. And sometimes that's when you get the best results, is when you're out of your comfort zone.
Susan, you were speaking earlier about it was during your master's studies that you found the way to bring your music into your visual practice. What were the turning points, or is there anything particular that struck you as to why it was important to bring them together?
Well, it was something that one of my tutors, Dan Shipsides, he, when you're at that level, you're using language a lot and you're learning. We were writing about our work a lot. Duncan Ross was our writing tutor. So much of our work was writing and using language, learning how to use language within our practice. And Dan said something. He mentioned, oh yeah, you're kind of use your fiddle like a bartering tool, because he also uses music in his work. So he kind of got it. And yeah, when he said that, I was like, yeah, that's what it is. It's not that I'm necessarily putting them together all the time or anything. It's like I'm sort of using them. It's like a tool. It was amazing, somebody else, bringing language to it, and that really made sense. And then I also was using more video, and I remember talking to Mary McIntyre, who was my other tutor, and she has a record label, so there's so many artists who are also musicians who are also artists. But anyway, I was asking Mary about sampling other people's work and using this and using that, and she was like, you could just do it yourself. Like, you're already a musician, and, trust yourself, trust the music that you can make yourself that will fit what you're trying to do. So yeah, it was so kind of so obvious. I didn't even see it. And I had been using some music, but I started using synthesizers more and combining that with fiddle and maybe using my own voice and stuff, and sort of pushing it out a bit.
And again, looking at the exhibition we have here, there's so much looking at the folk stories of Donegal and natural phenomenon and how it's been interpreted in these stories. So having the music that you play that's coming from these locations feels such an incredibly natural fit, even though fiddle playing and neon doesn't necessarily at first seem like a natural bedfellow, but it really works, I think. Can you tell us a little about some of the tunes that you're interested in from those areas? What are they looking at?
Well, I suppose there's a lot of tunes. I'm trying to think of one. There's one called Biddy from Mockras. That's the name of the tune, but that's named after the person who sort of embodied the tune. It was a lady called Biddy from Mockras, which is a little place along the coast once you leave Killybegs and you're going up further north. An amazing kind of outcrop of rock that sticks out over the sea. Anyway, it's a tiny little area, and Biddy, as most women at that time, many years ago, didn't play instruments. It wasn't appropriate for a woman to play instruments. So anyway, she lilted, because no one's going to stop you lilting. And she lilted tunes, and they were weird tunes in like triple into duple time signatures and things, and no one could understand. But anyway, she learned them from the fairies. That's where she got her tunes. That was her source. And yeah, things like that. There's just something about the conviction or the reality of, yeah, well, Biddy was learning the tunes from the fairies and that's why they're weird. And it's just so convincing and matter of fact or something, you know. So we'll be playing that tune, myself and a fiddle player, Denise Boyle from Glenties, next week in the gallery space.
And can I ask, is the fairy influence, is that from like Allingham? Is that what she would have been referring to? Is in like the
From
Ballyshannon kind of like stories?
Well, it's southwest Donegal, so not so far south as
Yeah.
Ballyshannon. Like there's an amazing fairy tale anthology that was collected in 1951, and that's what I've been looking at the most. And a lot of fiddle players in that area would refer to the stories in that book, but it's really
Yeah.
southwest, like Cookhar, Glencomkill area.
Okay. Yeah, I'm always amazed at how many great fairy stories we have and like fairy kind of tales, but they're not really something that like Ireland embraces as much as other countries. So like, you know, when you go to like Iceland and they embrace, what is it, their kind of stories.
Sagas.
Yeah, but it feels like we can embrace other stories more than and some, and the fairies I find way more interesting than many of the stories. That's cool.
I have to ask, what is lilting?
Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dum,
This is another moment where I feel very English. I'm constantly learning.
Does that make sense? Have you heard that before? That kind of thing? Yeah, like mouse music, you know. I mean, they would have it in England as well. I guess every country, it's kind of just a basic way of singing, but not singing, making the sound of an instrument.
Amazing. Peter, I mean, I'm assuming fairies don't play into your work, but maybe they do. But is there a connection to these lands and the country music, the hard country that you've been listening to? Because we had a project not so long ago with Frank Sweeney and Tom O'Day looking at the huge proliferations of pirate radio stations along the border that were all country music stations. And that's something that I never would have expected. So yeah, how does the land and the place come into your practice and interest?
Yeah, I mean, like there is quite a strong kind of connection between the last couple of years we went to the Steel Guitar Festival, the Irish Steel Guitar Festival in Dublin, and there's a whole right from the sort of 60s and 70s when pedal steels were a new instrument in the States. There were people in Ireland who were kind of interested and wanted kind of access to this instrument. So there's a whole history. There's a really great podcast, Steel Talk, on YouTube, which is guys from Northern Ireland and the South talking about the history of the steel guitar in Ireland, and it goes right back to, it parallels what was happening in America, but just on a much smaller scale. Anyway, and now there's at the Irish Steel Guitar Festival, you've got a whole room of people who kind of enjoy listening to this very specific kind of music, and there's a lot of really great players. So I recently met Ted Nesbitt, who is for the last sort of 40 years he's been dealing pedal steels in Ireland, and there's just a kind of wealth of history there, and something interesting about like the distance. So this is happening, this kind of music is kind of originating and tied to the States, but people here kind of trying to access it and finding ways to do that. Yeah.
And does the music end up being informed by folk tales and local stories? And does it become something else entirely?
The music kind of originating here, do you mean? I don't know. I think like it varies, and there are certainly people kind of, yes, absolutely kind of taking inspiration from something more kind of local. I think there's something about the model of these kind of songs that you can kind of lift a lot of this. Yeah, for me, a lot of the music that I kind of enjoy about this hard country songs is like, it's kind of relational. It's about relationships and emotions, and kind of trying to kind of regulate that or kind of work through those, and not always in the kind of best way. And obviously those are liftable, they're kind of not at all tied to place. They're kind of about a couple of people and their relationships to one another and how you feel and internal feelings. Yeah, but maybe like there's nice, yeah, I kind of have an interest in maybe people over here, not being able to have access to the instrument or lots of instruments, so they have to make do with like an old beaten up pedal steel that somebody's like passed them on, and or like making their own adjustments to it, or kind of learning how to like take apart and put together the instrument or repair it, which I kind of find interesting.
Yeah, I find that I mostly play like Appalachian folk music now, and that has come from playing music in Donegal. Like I went to Donegal, learned Donegal music for so long, but then I started to hear Appalachian music in Donegal, and like it kind of makes sense. There's this huge connection between especially Donegal and country music and the show bands, and like a lot of the subjects that I'm using in my work, who've told me about folklore and who are experts in their own language and who maybe didn't even speak English until they were like 7. They taught themselves guitar and they didn't even know what the instrument was. They figured out how to play chords, and then someone told them, oh, that's not how you play a chord. And they had to unlearn and relearn how to play this instrument. And then they ended up being in show bands and stuff. But they also play traditional music and have all these stories. And you've got people like Warren Bradley from Ballybuffet now, who's this amazing singing like someone from the 1930s in America, and she's from Ballybuffet. That it's kind of bizarre and beautiful, this connection between country music and Donegal.
It's funny, Susan, just when you were mentioning about the book of like fairy stories kind of originating in like 1951, and just because like this kind of music that I was kind of interested in is like that, it's kind of this like 50s, 60s, and there's something about it being kind of far enough in the past that even if they're not kind of writing fictional stories, but even people talking about their lives, their kind of approach to the world and their kind of outlook on it is different enough to us to kind of be
Becomes folklore kind of.
yeah, 100%. And I kind of find that distance really, really interesting and kind of magical and fictional. Yeah.
Ryan, coming to you. So I know that you've spoken about your record collection being extremely broad in terms of genres. I'm interested to hear more about some of your influences and also what led you to electronic music.
Yeah, so the electronic thing came much to my father's unhappiness. So, like growing up playing the guitar, I suppose it was the rebellious teen thing where I just didn't want to become my father and I wanted to explore other things. And I remember we were sitting down in a music shop called Trevor Keys, which would have been along the Spencer Road. And it would have been, I think there was only ever 2 real music shops that sold instruments in Derry. It was Trevor Keys on the water side and then Henderson's on the city side. Henderson still stands, it's been there a long time. But I remember I must have been around 17, so it's many years ago. It was the arrival of turntables, and turntables arrived like how Nike trainers would arrive in a really flashy box with like amazing graphics. Guitars and string instruments don't arrive like that. They arrive in some kind of eco looking box with nothing to get you excited about. Let's just say. So at this point, I had been through maybe 8 guitars, played in some band, and I was in the music shop and turntables had arrived, and it was like this breakdancing looking guy with a beanie hat on. It came with a VHS tape to show you how to use them, and they had this like PR campaign in all the music shops where they would have a TV playing this video of a guy scratching records and stuff. And I suppose that was my introduction to just kind of like music that I wasn't used to hearing. And even though it was in this music shop that was predominantly known for like actual instruments, they were selling a lot of it, much to their dismay. so so I kind of went down that route where I started DJing first. kind of set the guitar aside, unfortunately, for a couple of years, ran a few nights in town, and really just went down that world of like old school hip hop, breakbeat, kind of drum and bass. And at the time I was doing all that, I was kind of studying in art college until it got to the point where I went to Manchester for university. And I kind of went to Manchester at a really good time. It was like there was all these like English record labels that set up that were doing these kind of like crossover jazz hip hop things. All these really good turn live acts where, you know, hip hop acts would have like double bass players, and it wasn't as electronic focused as everything is now. There was a lot of live instrumentation, you know, on it. Naturally, I really enjoyed that. So I think when I came home after uni, I looked at the guitar again, found love for it, and then just started kind of amalgamating, I suppose, the two genres. I think anybody that's been in a band understands the frustration of trying to get everyone to turn up for band practice. And then people can turn up sometimes and not be on their game as well, especially drummers. But once you have a drum machine, that that all disappears. So yeah, it kind of started off like that. It was like, you know, started off playing guitar to a drum machine, and then, you know, the bass player wouldn't turn up, and I started programming a bass synth, and all of a sudden it was like, oh, I don't really need everybody anymore. I'm gonna do this. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to it. And then there's been many players that I've played with over the years, and even when you're all chatting about, you know, Donegal and stuff, you know, was I always remember during the Borders album, you know, Moya Brennan was one of our guest singers on one of the songs, and we were kind of on a call with her, and she says, you know, what would you like to achieve from this single? And I says, well, we don't really write singles as such, but I would like to try and get like whatever we release on national radio with the Irish language on it. And she says, how do you think we're going to do that? And I says, well, maybe if we like trick them. She says, what do you mean trick them? She says, well, why don't you sing in English the first verse and then change to Irish for the second verse? Because they only tend to listen to like, you know, 40 seconds of a track before deciding if it'll go on national radio. And fair play to Lauren Laverne, she caught on to it straight away, but still played it. But it's small ones like that, and the genres you're in are really important. And obviously, there's a kneecap. I don't really agree with what they're doing, but it's kind of refreshing to see, you know, what they're doing being looked at on a national level. But yeah, mine was a crossover from guitar and the electronic music. Yeah.
So sort of one part necessity, one part curiosity, and
Yeah.
yeah.
The frustration of this guitar can only do so much. It's like, how do you make those other sounds that everyone's doing? There's something nice about too when you learn an instrument and you understand chord structures and just, you know, how notes should sound. Once you start embracing other genres, you kind of have an ear for it, and I definitely find that a lot with I'm sure, Susan, yourself, you've probably and Peter have a very tuned ear, and you kind of know when things are working. And to get to that point as a musician, it's kind of like you don't really, I don't think you really train towards it. I think it just kind of happens over time. It's something that just happens, and then you just start being aware of other things rather than your own instrument. Yeah, I'm sure like with the exhibitions these two are doing, it's that's probably a focal point for you, isn't it? It's like the spatial awareness of the sound and what you are doing with it.
Yeah, is that something that you chime with, Susan and Peter? And also be really interested to hear about your influences as well, whether it's artists, whether it's music, or I don't know, daytime TV.
Yeah, I mean, influences like, yeah, audio, film, music. I've been watching The Handmaid's Tale, and like they have this amazing combination of synthetic sound with orchestra. Like I really love that, and you do get it in good quality soundtracks. Or what do you call that? The film with Scarlett Johansson, Under the
On the
Skin,
skin,
has got
yeah.
this like
Yeah.
amazing sort of tense audio, you know, that it's like when you're making video art as well, it becomes like the audio is so loaded and there's so much potential there for expression or to, you know, really hold back. And I suppose things like that, films and TV shows that mess with the voice as well. Like I've got these old recordings of people from the National Folklore Archive in Dublin, and I got my brother to just sort of mess around with the voices a little bit and have them sort of repeated or glitchy, you know, things like that. I suppose I'm influenced by those kind of things, but Werner Herzog would be a big influence on me as to the way he combines, like it's not something that I do myself, but it's something I would love to be able to do, like combines these epic pieces of audio with or the other way around, you know, or, I don't know, just that he combines in an unusual way music with visual.
And you, Peter?
Yeah, I think that sort of contextual gap, Susan, is interesting. Like, and kind of allows you to sort of see something different. There's a film. It's a horror film about a family of kind of cannibals. But you get to the end of the film and they hit the credits and they play. I think it's Tommy Strange, and it's a kind of honky tonk hard country song, and it plays kind of over the credits, and it's called "It Was Me Who Made Her Bad." Just the music is really emotive, but hearing that song, which doesn't totally marry to the genre of film, and the content isn't easily mapped on, so the gender roles don't fit. The central character, arguably the central character of the film, is a girl, and so you can't kind of marry the two kind of really easily. But hearing this kind of genre against this kind of narrative that you've experienced quite viscerally, as kind of horror films do, I find that totally reframed that song for me, and kind of a way to kind of think about it more as like a strip it maybe of its like surface context, and kind of see how do we map it like onto other people, or what other feelings are like accessed in this song. And I think that was a big influence on me, finding ways to like juxtapose material that just allows you to sort of see it in a different way.
I don't know if I want to see that film.
Yeah.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think that particular little bit of like kind of editing or juxtaposition at the end is kind of good.
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to draw to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really nice to hear about your practices. I know I've learnt a lot. Thank you so much, Peter Glasgow, Ryan Vail, and Susan Hughes. You can read more about each of the speakers by following the links in this episode's description, and you can see documentation from the exhibition by Susan at ccadld.org/exhibitions. Thank you for listening.